Thank you. It's vegetarian. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarification on that.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you all so much for being here. And I'm excited today to talk about Healthspan. And it's a book I wrote a couple years ago called The Healthspan Solution, but there's been so much more that has evolved in the conversations. And I'm excited to talk about this with you. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Hopefully everyone could see that. Put this up here. Okay. Perfect. All right. So I know I can't see your hands, unfortunately, but I would like to ask you, how many of you would like to live to be 120 years old? Now, I know I can't see your hands, but I'd like you to think about it for a second. So according to the US Census Bureau projections, the US population is rapidly aging due to falling birth rates and rising life expectancies. And by the year 2050, 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 or older, and at least 400,000 will be 100 or older. And according to a survey by the Pew Research Center, they asked whether people personally would choose to undergo medical treatments to slow the aging process and live to be 120 or more. 56% of US adults said, no, thank you. So let's modify this question. What if I asked you, would you want to live to be 120 years old and maintain your agility, your health, your faculties? Nobody wants to age. Ideally, we live our most healthful, vibrant, vital, cognizant selves as long as possible, enjoying love and connection and passion and joy until we fall asleep and drift into whatever comes next. So today I want to talk about what aging is, how diet and lifestyle play a role, some strategies to optimize health span, and then we'll leave some time for questions. What exactly is aging, actually? There are so many mechanisms, so many variables, so many fascinating pathways by which the research is exploding. Here are just a few of the major fields of studies and mechanisms by which we age. So there's inflammation, and I'm not talking about acute inflammation, which we need. Acute inflammation is when you get a cut or you get hurt or you get sick and your body sends out all of its soldiers to help attack it and make you back to homeostasis. I'm talking about the systemic chronic inflammation, this low-grade inflammation that you can measure in your blood in C-reactive protein. But a lot of scientists and experts consider chronic inflammation to be the root cause of most disease. There's this term that's been coming up called inflammaging, which basically talks about this and how all the mechanisms by which inflammation leads to increased morbidity and mortality. And then there's oxidation. This is the accumulation of DNA damage that accelerates aging. Then there's the pathway of mTOR, a protein that helps control several cell functions, including cell division and survival, but it's strongly implicated in aging and the aging processes. In fact, they found that if you block mTOR, you can stop cancer cell proliferation. Then there's AMPK, AMP activated protein kinase. This is considered a master energy sensor, a pro-longevity sensor. It induces something called autophagy. And autophagy is a process by which a cell breaks down and destroys old, damaged, or abnormal proteins and other substances in its cytoplasm. Then there's IGF-1 and growth hormone. IGF-1 is a key signal for cell growth regulation. We know that it declines in our blood as we age, and we know that centenarians have lower IGF-1 levels. There's cellular senescence, which is a state of stable cell cycle arrest in which proliferating cells become resistant to growth-promoting stimuli, typically in response to DNA damage. And then telomere attrition. This is the gradual loss of these protective caps that are on our chromosomes caused by multiple types of stress exposures. So now we're not going to dive any deeper into any of this, although it is extremely important. Instead, I'm going to defer you to this extraordinary book you may have read already. And if you haven't, I can't recommend it enough. This is the most extraordinary new tome by the amazing Dr. Michael Greger, How Not to Age. It deep dives into all of the things I just mentioned, all of the mechanisms. So there's so many more, how we can use those to help increase our health span and to reduce our, rate of morbidity, mortality. So I can't recommend this book enough. Now, in this book, there are myriad extraordinary quotes and so much inspiration, but I wanted to share my favorite quote of this tome, and it is this, and I'll tell you why. Each year, you are reborn. You destroy and create anew nearly your entire body weight in cells every year. About 50 billion of your cells die each day, but about 50 billion new cells are born. The reason this is my favorite quote is because diet, we know, is the #1 cause of early death and disability in the world. This is so empowering, this quote. Why? Because with all of the unknowns and all of the chaos in life, the one thing you really do get to control is what you put on the end of your fork. And that is what I love about this quote. So what is health span? Well, technically, it's the period of life spent in good health, free from the chronic diseases and disabilities of aging. This is about adding life to your years, not just years to your life. It's about living longer, not just living longer. Health is so complicated. There are so many branches that come out from looking at all of the things you can do and all the things that influence your health in either direction. Of course, diet is #1. All the details of diet. And then what about movement and exercise and stress and sleep and on and on and on and on. And as I was working on this talk, I was listening to a podcast just coincidentally yesterday. It was actually a podcast on finance and economics. But there was this wonderful quote that this guy on the podcast, the host, quoted, and it's perfectly applicable to what we're going to talk about today. And this is my goal for today, actually. In a book called Succeeding by John Reed, it is quoted that he said, "When you first study a field, it seems like you have to memorize a zillion different things. You don't. What you need to identify are the 3 to 5 core principles that govern a field. The million things you thought you had to memorize are just various combinations of those core principles." This is my most important thing I've ever thought about, because that's how I felt when I was learning about nutrition many, many years ago. And it was so complicated and so many nuances and so many details. And it's fascinating. Each little thing, like you could take one little thing, fruit, and break it down into a million parts of fruit and types of fruit and how you eat fruit. So many things that it can be so complicated. But really what it boils down to are some really fundamental principles, which is what I try to communicate in my work with my clients, in my audiences, in my books, to keep this simple. Because if it's simple, it's applicable. And if it's simple, you know how to approach it. So that's what I want to do today. We're going to put that complicated, fascinating stuff aside, leave it to Dr. Greger, who tackled it gorgeously. And we're going to go about, what do we need to know? What can we extrapolate from these data to apply to our lives and make it better, to improve our health span, to decrease our morbidity, mortality, and to live our best lives possible? It boils down to this. Michael Pollan said it best. He really did. Eat food, whole food, not too much, mostly plants. This is everything you need to know, really. And again, we're going to get into some of the nuances, but I broke it down into this version of that. Diet and health span comes down to the quality, so what you're eating, how much you're eating, the quality, and then the quantity, the frequency and the volume of how much you're eating. And then we're going to talk about the fine tuning. But because I've got 25 plus years as a personal trainer, and exercise, fitness, and movement is so important too, I'm going to deep dive into that today because I don't get a chance to do that very often. And it is apropos to what we're talking about. But again, number one is diet. And let's emphasize that. So in addition to Dr. Greger's brilliant tome, there's a great article that I stumbled on that summarizes the different dietary strategies for health span. So with all the different dietary patterns that we've analyzed and that's analyzed in this article, and via all the various mechanisms by which aging occurs, only few that I mentioned, there's so many more, but they all center on two primary things: eating less and eating plants, mostly plant slant, which is how they talk about it in the blue zones.